The wind blew across the overpass, rustling the fur of a lonely German shepherd. He stood still, his eyes fixed on the busy road below. Cars sped past, their headlights flashing in the early morning mist. No one stopped. No one noticed him, except for a few kind strangers who had seen him there before. The dog had been waiting for days. His ribs were starting to show, and his thick coat was dirty. But he didn't leave. He couldn't. His heart told him to stay, to keep watching, to keep hoping. Drivers on the freeway glanced up as they passed. Some felt pity but kept driving. Others took pictures and shared them online. "A dog is waiting for someone," one post read. Another said, "He won't leave. Does anyone know who he belongs to?" A little girl in the back seat of a car pointed at him. "Mommy, look at the dog," she said. Her mother sighed. "Poor thing. I wonder if someone lost him." But the truth was much sadder. The German shepherd had not wandered there by accident. He had been left. A heartbreaking memory. Rex didn't understand why his owner had stopped the car that day. He remembered jumping out, his tail wagging. He had always loved car rides. But then the door closed, and the car drove away, faster and faster, until it disappeared down the highway. At first, he had chased after it, his paws pounding against the pavement. He ran until his legs gave out. Then he had waited, and waited. Days passed. He watched every car, hoping his owner would come back. He was hungry, but he ignored the food that kind people left. His heart was too broken. A woman who cares, Claire, a rescue volunteer, saw the online posts about the dog. Her heart ached for him. She had rescued many animals before, but this case was different. She could see the pain in his eyes. She packed a small bag with dog food, a blanket, and a leash. Then she drove to the overpass. When she arrived, she spotted him right away. He stood near the edge, staring at the road below. She stepped out of her car slowly. "Hey, buddy," she called softly. The German shepherd's ears twitched, but he didn't move. Claire took a step closer and placed some food on the ground. "You must be hungry," she said gently. The dog glanced at her, then back at the road. He didn't eat. Claire sighed. "You're waiting for someone, aren't you?" She sat down on the sidewalk, keeping her distance. She had learned that some animals needed time. She wasn't going to rush him. For an hour, she just sat there, watching him. Occasionally, he looked at her, but only for a second. Then his gaze returned to the freeway. Claire knew she had a long way to go, but she wasn't giving up. As the sun began to set, the wind grew colder. Claire wrapped her arms around herself and sighed. "I'll be back tomorrow," she promised. She stood up, leaving the food behind, and walked to her car. Before she drove away, she glanced at the dog one more time. He was still waiting. The next morning, Claire returned to the overpass. The air was crisp, and the sky was painted with soft shades of pink and orange. As she pulled up in her car, she felt a tightness in her chest. Would the dog still be there? She stepped out and scanned the area. Her heart sank. The overpass was empty. For a moment, she feared the worst. Had he given up? Had something happened to him? Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw movement behind a nearby bush. A familiar pair of deep brown eyes peeked out cautiously. Claire let out a breath of relief. "You're still here," she whispered, earning his trust. She knelt down and placed fresh food and water on the sidewalk. "Come on, buddy," she said gently. "You have to be hungry." The German shepherd watched her but didn't move. His body was tense, as if he was afraid she might chase him. Claire didn't push him. Instead, she sat down a few feet away, just like the day before. Minutes passed. The wind rustled the leaves. The sound of cars filled the silence between them. Then finally, the dog took a cautious step forward. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air. Slowly, he crept closer. One step, then another. Claire held her breath. She didn't want to scare him away. Finally, the dog reached the food bowl. He lowered his head and took a bite. Claire smiled. That's it. Good boy. For the first time, the dog ate. He was still watching the road, but at least now he was taking care of himself. Claire knew this was progress, a name from the past. As the dog ate, Claire noticed something. A metal tag hung from his collar. Carefully, she leaned in just enough to read it. The letters were worn, but she could still make them out. R-E-X. Rex, she whispered. The name felt familiar, like it had been spoken many times before. The dog froze. His ears perked up, and he looked at her with wide eyes. Claire's heart pounded. That was his name. He remembered it. She smiled softly. Rex, that's your name, isn't it? Rex stared at her for a moment, then lowered his head again. But Claire had seen something, a flicker of recognition, of something buried deep in his heart. He wasn't just a stray. He belonged to someone. The mystery deepens. That night, Claire couldn't stop thinking about Rex. Why had he been left here? Who had abandoned him? She picked up her phone and searched online for lost dog reports. She scrolled through pictures, hoping to find one that matched Rex's face. Then she noticed something else. The same overpass had been in the news a few weeks ago. A serious accident had happened there. A man had been rushed to the hospital. His name wasn't listed, but the article mentioned something strange. Witnesses had seen a dog running after the ambulance. Claire's stomach tightened. Was it possible? Could Rex have been chasing his owner that day? Her hands trembled as she picked up her keys. She had to find out the truth. And she knew exactly where to start. Claire couldn't sleep that night. Her mind kept going back to the accident report. Was Rex waiting for someone who could never come back? The next morning, she decided to visit the hospital mentioned in the news article. Maybe someone there knew more about the man in the accident. Before leaving, she stopped by the overpass. Rex was still there. He lay curled up near the bushes, his ears twitching at the sound of her car. "Hey, Rex," she called gently. He lifted his head but didn't move. Claire placed a fresh bowl of food and water beside him. "I'll be back soon." "Okay." Rex blinked but said nothing. His eyes, full of quiet sadness, returned to the highway below. Claire sighed and got back in her car. She had to help him. Elite at the hospital. The hospital was busy, filled with nurses, doctors, and patients walking in and out. Claire approached the front desk, her heart pounding. "Excuse me," she said. "A few weeks ago, there was a car accident near the overpass. The man involved. Do you know if he's still here?" The receptionist frowned. "I'm sorry, but we can't share patient information." Claire nodded, expecting this answer, but she wasn't giving up. "I think he had a dog, a German Shepherd. The dog has been waiting for him all this time." The receptionist's eyes widened. "Wait, are you talking about the shepherd from the news?" Claire leaned forward. "You've heard about him." The woman nodded. Some of the nurses were talking about a dog that tried to chase an ambulance. They said it was heartbreaking. She lowered her voice. "The man in the accident. His name is Jake. He was in a coma for weeks." Claire gasped. "Is he alive?" The receptionist hesitated. "He woke up a few days ago. He's still weak, but he's recovering." Claire's hands shook. Jake was alive. Rex's owner was alive. The missing piece. Claire couldn't believe it. Rex had never been abandoned. He had been left behind by accident. She took a deep breath. "Can I see him? I need to talk to him about Rex." The receptionist hesitated. Then, seeing the determination in Claire's eyes, she nodded. "I'll check with his nurse. Wait here." Claire's heart pounded as she sat in the waiting area. Minutes felt like hours. Then, finally, the receptionist returned. "You can see him. Room 214. The man who loved Rex." Claire knocked softly before stepping inside the hospital room. A man lay in bed, his face pale, his arm in a sling. He looked up at her with tired eyes. "Hi," Claire said nervously. "Are you Jake?" The man nodded slowly. His voice was weak. "Yeah, do I know you?" "No," Claire said, stepping closer. "But I know someone who's been waiting for you." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" Claire took a deep breath. "Your dog, Rex. He's still at the overpass. He never left." For a moment, there was silence. Then, Jake's eyes widened. His breath hitched. "Rex? He's alive." Claire nodded. "He's been waiting for you since the accident. Every single day." Jake's hands clenched the blanket. His voice broke. "I thought I lost him forever." Claire smiled. "You didn't. And if you're ready, I can take you to him." Jake could hardly believe what he was hearing. Rex was alive. His loyal friend had never left, never given up. He had been waiting all this time. Tears burned in Jake's eyes. He tried to sit up, but pain shot through his body. His ribs were still healing, and his muscles were weak. Claire placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Take it easy. You're still recovering." Jake shook his head. "I need to see him now." Claire hesitated. "You're not strong enough to leave the hospital on your own." "I don't care," Jake said, his voice firm. "He's been waiting for me. I can't make him wait any longer." Claire saw the pain in his eyes, not just from his injuries, but from the thought of Rex alone on that overpass. She knew she couldn't say no. She turned to the nurse standing by the door. "Can he leave for a little while, just to see his dog?" The nurse sighed. "It's against hospital rules. But if he's in a wheelchair, and if someone is with him, I suppose it's possible." Jake grabbed Claire's hand. "Please." Claire nodded. "Let's go." The journey to the overpass. Minutes later, Jake was seated in a wheelchair, a nurse helping to guide him through the hospital doors. Claire rushed to get her car, her heart racing. As soon as Jake was safely inside, she started the engine. "Hold on, Rex. We're coming." The ride felt like forever. Jake gripped the seat, his body tense. His mind raced with memories. Playing fetch with Rex, going on long walks, feeling safe with his best friend by his side. And then the accident. He had been driving home with Rex that night. The rain had made the road slippery. A truck had swerved into his lane. He remembered the crash, the pain, then darkness. When he woke up weeks later in the hospital, he thought Rex was gone forever. But he was wrong. A dog who never gave up. When Claire's car pulled up near the overpass, she saw him immediately. Rex was still there. His body was thinner, his fur dull, but his posture was the same. Watching, waiting. Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Oh, buddy." Claire jumped out of the car and rushed to open the passenger door. "Rex," she called, hoping the dog would come closer. But Rex didn't move. His ears flicked at the sound of his name, but he stayed frozen, as if he didn't believe it. Jake swallowed hard. "Let me try." Claire helped him out of the car, supporting his weight as he stood, weak but determined. Jake took a deep breath and called out the name he had said 1,000 times before. "Rex, it's me, boy." For a moment, there was silence. Then something changed. Rex's ears shot up. His body stiffened. His head snapped toward the sound of Jake's voice. And then he moved. A reunion to remember. At first, Rex walked, his steps slow and unsure. But then, as if a switch had flipped, he ran. He bolted across the pavement, his tail wagging wildly. His paws hit the ground hard as he sprinted toward the man he had never stopped waiting for. Jake braced himself as Rex leaped up, paws on his chest, whimpering and licking his face. Tears streamed down Jake's cheeks as he wrapped his arms around his best friend. "I'm here, boy. I'm here." Claire watched, her own eyes misty. Rex had waited for a miracle. And today, that miracle had finally come. Jake held Rex tightly, feeling his warm fur against his skin. The German shepherd whimpered softly, pressing his head against Jake's chest, as if making sure this was real. His owner was back. He hadn't waited for nothing. Jake ran his fingers through Rex's fur. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never meant to leave you." Rex let out a deep sigh, his tail wagging. He didn't care about the past. All that mattered was that his best friend was here now. Claire wiped away a tear. She had rescued many animals before, but she had never seen a reunion like this. Pure love. Pure loyalty. Weak but determined. After what felt like forever, Jake finally pulled away, though his hands never left Rex's fur. "You look so thin," he murmured, checking Rex's ribs. "You must have been starving out here." Rex licked his hand, as if to say, "I didn't care. I was waiting for you." Claire stepped forward. "He wouldn't eat much while he was waiting," she explained. "But now that you're back, I think he will." Jake nodded. He took a deep breath and tried to straighten up, but his body was weak. His legs shook. Claire caught his arm. "Whoa, take it easy. You just got out of the hospital." Jake gave a small smile. "I know, but I need to take him home." He looked at Rex. "Would you come with me, boy?" Rex tilted his head, as if thinking. He glanced back at the spot he had waited for so long. Then, as if making his choice, he turned back to Jake and nudged his hand. He was ready. A new beginning. With Claire's help, Jake got back into the car. Rex hesitated for just a second before jumping in after him. For the first time in weeks, Rex was not on the overpass. He was safe. As they drove, Jake kept one hand resting on Rex's back. The dog lay down, letting out a deep breath, as if finally letting go of all the worry he had carried. Claire glanced at them and smiled. "He's going to be okay now." Jake nodded. "Yeah, we both are." Home, sweet home. When they reached Jake's house, Rex's ears perked up. The moment the car door opened, he jumped out, sniffing the air. He remembered this place. Jake stepped out slowly, his body still sore, but his heart full. "Come on, buddy. Let's go inside." Rex hesitated for a moment, looking up at Jake. Then, tail wagging, he followed him to the door. As soon as they stepped inside, Rex's nose went wild. He sniffed the couch, the rug, the jacket Jake had left hanging by the door. Everything smelled like home. Jake chuckled. "You remember, huh?" Rex barked softly, his tail wagging harder. Claire smiled. "I think he knows he's home again." Jake turned to her. "I don't know how to thank you. If you hadn't cared, he might still be out there." Claire shrugged. "It wasn't just me. Rex never gave up on you. That's real love." Jake knelt down beside his best friend. "Yeah, and I'll never leave him again." Rex licked Jake's face, letting out a happy whimper. He was home. He was safe. And most of all, he was loved. Rex paced around the house, sniffing everything. The couch, the kitchen table, the old blanket in the corner. It was all familiar, but it had been so long. His tail wagged slowly as memories came back to him. Jake watched him with a soft smile. "It's still your home, buddy." Rex turned and looked at him, his ears twitching at the sound of Jake's voice. Then, as if finally believing it, he trotted over and laid his head on Jake's knee. Jake ran his fingers through Rex's fur. "I missed you, boy." Claire, who was standing nearby, smiled. "It might take him some time to adjust. He's been in survival mode for weeks." Jake nodded. "I'll be patient with him, just like he was patient for me." A good meal and a soft bed. Jake stood up slowly. His ribs still ached, and he had to be careful with his movements. But one thing was more important than his pain, making sure Rex felt at home again. He walked to the kitchen and opened a can of dog food. The moment the smell filled the air, Rex's ears perked up. His tail started wagging faster. Jake laughed. "I knew you'd be hungry." He poured the food into a bowl and set it down. Rex hesitated for only a second before digging in. He ate quickly, but this time, it wasn't because he was scared or starving. It was because he knew he was safe. After finishing his meal, Rex stretched out on his old dog bed in the corner of the living room. He let out a deep sigh, his body finally relaxing. Jake sat down beside him. "It's okay, buddy. You don't have to worry anymore." Rex's eyes slowly closed, his breathing steady. For the first time in weeks, he fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. A visit to the vet. The next morning, Jake woke up to the sound of soft paws padding across the floor. He opened his eyes and saw Rex sitting beside the bed, looking at him with bright, trusting eyes. "Morning, boy," Jake said, reaching up to scratch behind his ears. Claire had suggested taking Rex to the vet for a checkup, just to make sure he was healthy after weeks on the streets. So later that day, they drove to the clinic. Rex sat in the back seat, his head resting on Jake's shoulder. At the vet's office, Rex was nervous at first, but Jake stayed by his side, whispering comforting words. The vet examined him carefully. "He's a little underweight, but overall, he's in good health," she said. "He's a strong dog." Jake smiled proudly. "Yeah, he is." Before they left, the vet scanned Rex's microchip to confirm his identity. Seeing Jake's name in the system brought everything full circle. Rex had always been his dog, and now he was home where he belonged. The first walk together again. That evening, Jake grabbed Rex's leash and smiled. "What do you say, boy? Want to go for a walk?" The moment Rex saw the leash, his tail wagged wildly. He barked once, full of excitement. Jake laughed. "I'll take that as a yes." They stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapping around them. As they walked through the quiet neighborhood, Jake realized something. This wasn't just any walk. This was a new beginning. Rex trotted beside him, no longer lost, no longer waiting. He was finally where he was meant to be. Days passed, and Rex slowly adjusted to his old life. But some things had changed. He still followed Jake everywhere, as if afraid he would disappear again. If Jake left the room, Rex would get up and check where he was. If Jake went outside, Rex would sit by the door, waiting. Claire noticed it one afternoon. "He's scared of losing you again," she said gently. Jake sighed, kneeling beside Rex. He stroked the dog's fur. "I wish I could make him understand that I'm not going anywhere." Claire smiled. "You already are. Just keep showing him love, and he'll feel safe again." Jake nodded. He had always known that Rex was loyal to him. Now it was his turn to prove that he was just as loyal to Rex. First trip to the park. A week later, Jake decided to take Rex somewhere special, the park they used to visit before the accident. When they arrived, Rex's ears perked up. He sniffed the air, his tail wagging slightly. It was familiar. Jake unhooked the leash, watching carefully. Would Rex run? Would he feel nervous? But instead, Rex stood still for a moment, then turned and looked at Jake, as if asking, "Is this okay?" Jake smiled. "Go on, boy. Have fun." Rex hesitated for only a second. Then he took off, running across the grass. The wind blew through his fur as he dashed in circles, sniffing the ground, chasing the leaves. Jake laughed. For the first time since he came home, Rex looked truly free. Claire, who had come along, smiled. "He's happy." Jake nodded. "Yeah, and so am I." The unexpected visitor. As Rex ran through the park, something caught his attention. A little boy, no older than 6, stood nearby with his mother. The boy had a small ball in his hand. Rex stopped, watching. His tail wagged. The boy smiled, and without thinking, tossed the ball. To everyone's surprise, Rex chased after it. He caught the ball in his mouth and ran back, dropping it at the boy's feet. The little boy laughed. "Wow, he's so smart." His mother looked at Jake. "Is he your dog?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, he's been through a lot, but he's a great dog." The woman smiled. "You're lucky to have him." Jake chuckled, watching Rex play. "Yeah, but really, I think I'm the lucky one." a sign of healing. That night, Jake sat on the couch, rubbing his sore ribs. Recovery was slow, but he was getting stronger every day. Rex lay beside him, resting his head on Jake's leg. Jake ran his fingers through his fur. "You had fun today, huh?" Rex thumped his tail in response. Jake sighed, looking at his loyal friend. "I don't know how I got so lucky to have a dog like you." Rex didn't need words to answer. He simply licked Jake's hand, curled up beside him, and closed his eyes. For the first time since the accident, Rex didn't look worried. He didn't look lost. He looked home. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal for Jake and Rex. Each day, Rex grew more confident, more relaxed. He no longer waited nervously by the door whenever Jake left the room. He no longer flinched at loud sounds or looked over his shoulder, afraid of being left behind. He knew he was home. Jake, too, was healing. His body was still sore, but his strength was coming back. More importantly, his heart felt whole again, because Rex was by his side. One morning, as the sun streamed through the windows, Jake stretched and glanced down. Rex was curled up on the floor beside his bed, sleeping peacefully. Jake smiled. No matter what happened, Rex would always be there. A surprise for Rex. That afternoon, Claire came over with a surprise. She carried a large bag and set it down with a grin. "What's that?" Jake asked, raising an eyebrow. Claire pulled out a brand new dog bed, a thick blanket, and a few colorful toys. "For Rex," she said, "he deserves a little extra love after everything he's been through." Jake chuckled. "You didn't have to do that." Claire shrugged. "I wanted to." Rex sniffed the bed, then wagged his tail. When Claire tossed a squeaky toy, he pounced on it immediately, chomping down until it let out a loud squeak. Jake laughed. "I think he approves." Claire smiled. "He's a happy dog again." Jake watched as Rex rolled onto his back, paws in the air, playing like a puppy. "Yeah," Jake said softly. "And I'm never letting him go again." The final test. A few days later, Jake decided to take Rex on a drive. It was the first time since the accident that they had gone in the car together, just the two of them. Jake wasn't sure how Rex would react. Would he be scared? Would he think he was being left behind again? But as Jake opened the car door, Rex hesitated only for a second before hopping inside. Jake sat in the driver's seat and reached over to scratch behind Rex's ears. "Ready, boy." Rex let out a small, excited bark. Jake smiled and started the engine. They drove down familiar streets, passing the park, the vet's office, and finally, the overpass where Rex had waited for so long. Jake slowed the car as they passed it. His heart squeezed as he remembered the lonely figure of his best friend, sitting in the same spot, day after day, hoping for his return. He reached over and gently patted Rex's head. "You don't ever have to wait for me again," he whispered. Rex licked Jake's hand in response, as if to say, "I know." Jake pressed the gas and drove forward, leaving the past behind. A bond that can't be broken. That night, as Jake sat on the couch, Rex curled up beside him, resting his head on Jake's lap. Jake stroked his fur, feeling the warmth, the love, the unbreakable bond between them. "We've been through a lot, huh, buddy?" Rex thumped his tail. Jake leaned back and sighed. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Rex didn't move. He didn't need to. Because no matter what happened, no matter where life took them, they would always have each other. Forever.